to Anesthesia School 101. We're going to talk about the difference between epidurals and spinals. Have you ever had a C-section or given birth and had an epidural? The most common is an epidural for labor and then a spinal for a C-section. So let's talk about it. So here is your body, okay? She's got the juicy lip with the under juicy lip contour right here. Get that juicy lip, okay? This is your front of your body, so your heart and organs, and then there's your baby, already head down. Okay, so I come into the room to give your epidural. We're gonna talk epidural first. Epidural, we're gonna go through these layers until we get to the epidural space, okay? The epidural space is actually a potential space. There's actually not an actual opening or space there. We make that space. The irony behind this is I'm mostly nervous about epidurals, which don't even actually go in and touch your spinal cord or spinal fibers, but a spinal does. But I don't usually get people who are going in for a C-section being nervous about that. They're more nervous about getting an epidural if that was their option. So anyways, when we first go in for an epidural, we're gonna feel for those spinous processes. You ever go to your back and you feel those little round poking out things? That's the spinous process. This is a sagittal cut of your back. So actually this is your vertebra right here, this brown and brown, but there's actually an opening in the middle and that's where your spinal cord lives. Okay. So here's the spinal cord and here's your vertebra out here, these little spinous processes that we feel for. So I go to your back and I feel for those and I find a space in between two dots, essentially, two of those little humps, two humps. Find a space, usually L3, L4. Let's say that's right here. So we're gonna go in here. First, we're gonna hit skin, then we're gonna hit the fat, and then we're gonna hit some muscle. We're gonna get through that. And then we're gonna hit the supraspinous ligament, this one right here. We're gonna go through that, and then we're gonna get through the intraspinous, then intraspinous ligament. And then we're gonna get to the ligamentum of flavum. I don't think there's enough, but I like to say it, ligamentum of flavum, because it reminds me of food and I like food. And that's the most important guy when doing an epidural, okay? When I'm advancing my epidural needle and I reach the ligamentum of flavum, and as I'm advancing through each layer, my brain is taking note of how each feels. They all feel different against my needle. I get to this ligamentum of flavum and it feels sturdy, makes my needle get like, instead of being like, it's like, it's hard. My needle's not moving up and down, okay? And I get there and I know I'm close. Then I start doing something different with my needle, which is I'm gonna start looking for loss of resistance. I put a syringe on the back of my epidural needle and I start bouncing against it with some fluid. And I am moving so slowly through this little area with my needle, okay? We've gone through these layers. I've gone through the supraspinous ligament, the intraspinous ligament, and then I'm getting to the ligamentum of flavum. Okay, so right here, I'm behind your back and my needle has gone through all those places. I have numbed up your back before we got there. I have from here to find the epidural space because I don't know, somewhere in between here and there is when I'm gonna find that epidural space. If I go too far, I've punctured the dura and I'm in the subarachnoid area and I'm going to get CSF fluid and I have gone too far, and that is what is called a wet tap. And then you will need most likely a blood patch to fix your headache. So I'm going to slowly advance my needle here and I'm looking until my needle does a nice little fancy trick for me called loss of resistance, and I find that epidural space, and right here, right above the dura, which is the beginning of your spinal cord layers, hence epi, which means above, the dura, which is why it's called epidural space. Right here, I'm going to expand this area and create a little pocket of air or fluid with my needle. We'll say fluid so that y'all don't freak out. So here it is, right above that dura. Put a big X. That's where I'm going with my epidural needle, to that spot. A spinal, I'm using a much smaller needle, and I'm talking like super small. And I'm going all the way until I hit CSF on purpose, where my spinal fibers are and everything. So I'm doing an epidural though. Let's use green. We haven't used green. When I'm doing an epidural, here's my epidural needle going in. And I've gotten through, I'm in the ligamentum flavum, and then I lose loss of resistance, and I know I'm in the epidural space. I dilate that area with fluid, and then advance my little tiny catheter through my needle. So I'm going to put it through my needle and thread it up into this area, and it's going to start dripping out medication and bathing these nerve roots. So it actually never touches your nerves. It's just the roots of the nerves. Like imagine when you're watering your plant, you're not watering the leaves up there, you're watering the roots that then go to the plant leaves and feed that. Same with an epidural. I'm going to feed these little roots with anesthetic and a little bit of pain medicine. And then it'll hence get to your spinal cord and then numb things from there on out. But it's not actually in your spinal cord, okay? Now spinal, I'm going in. Same thing, I found my spinous processes. I found the space in between. I'm going in. I feel that I'm in the ligament. So I know that I'm still going in the right direction, but I know I need to keep going, okay? And I keep going until I get I pop through the dura and get to my CSF fluid. And slowly fluid drips back out of my needle and tells me I am where I need to be. I want to see fluid when I'm doing a spinal. I do not want to see fluid dripping out of my needle when I'm doing an epidural. The needle is so small with a spinal that when the fluid drips out, it's so minute that it's not going to leave you with a headache. The epidural needle is so big that if fluid drips out, it's coming out like a water hose. I mean, it's like, okay, spinal needle, deep, deep. Epidural needle, if I'm in the subarachnoid space. So anyways, spinal, I want to go all the way to this area of CSF and get fluid back. And then I give the medication through there and it bathes within your spinal cord and spinal fibers down here. And then it makes you numb from there on out. Okay. So very different. One is within the spinal cord and one is above epi. Okay. Epidural. Okay. I don't know, helps because I try to, there's other layers here, some veins and plexuses that we could go into depth about, but we're not going to try to do all that. I'm trying to just make this as easy understandable as possible. I don't know if I did that. Epidural is above the dura. In your brain, you can think of not even touching the spinal cord or the layers of the spinal cord yet. And spinal is actually in there and you want CSF. I don't know if that helps.